Channing Benson, Split Experimentation Advisor, here to talk to you about Data Hub and Data Export, a new capability in Split that lets you export historical impressions and event data. So here's what we'll be reviewing in the video. We'll talk about what the data export capabilities provide. We'll have a demo and an explanation of how to use those capabilities. And then we'll finish up with some details around the administration of data export, including how you can control which users can export data, as well as some information about the quotas and limits to the data export capability. So here's the description of what data export consists of. It's the ability to download historical data from Split. It's similar to our existing LiveTail capabilities, but instead of giving you a picture of what data is currently flowing, you can specify a time range and download the data from that time range. It can cover either impressions, the results of get treatment events, or events that you send either via Trac, a segment integration, an mParticle integration, a Google Analytics integration, or our admin API. And when you query the data, you can obtain specific information, impressions for a particular split or for all your splits. You can specify the time frame over which you want to record the data or capture the data, or the event type, for instance. You can limit it to a specific event type. And you kick off the query, and when it's done, you get a link to download a gzipped CSV file of the data. So now let's give you a demo of this capability. You first navigate to over on the left-hand side where it says Data Hub. Make sure you're in the workspace in which you want to do the export from if you have multiple workspaces. And at the top, you're going to want to pick the environment that you're going to download the information from, because remember, each environment has separate SDK instances sending data to them. And so in this case, we're going to select Preview. And notice we have LiveTail if you want to see what data is flowing in at this moment in time, but the data export capability is in, as you might expect, the data export tab. And if we look at that, there's two queries we can make. We can query impression data or events data. And down below, there's previous exports that have been done. So let's look at creating a query for impressions data. We click on the Create button, and then it says data type here. We could switch to events if we wanted, but we're going to leave it at impressions. And then the time frame over which you want to download the impressions. And note that if you select a specific time frame using, like if I set this to be 7:15 p.m., that's going to be 7:15 p.m. in my local browser time. So in my case, that's Mountain Standard Time on November 1st, which was yesterday. But let's just, for now, we'll use one of the convenient buttons. We'll say the last 7 days. We're going to select all the impressions from the last 7 days. And then we're going to add, so if we just left the query like this, it would be impressions for all of the splits in this particular environment for the last 7 days. And they might span multiple versions. But in this case, we're going to add some query criteria to get some specific information. And we're only going to grab things from one particular split. So we say split equals. And then we select, let's just say, our front-end discount coupon split. And then version, maybe we just want the latest version. And so we're going to grab that. And one trick you might want to use is if you want to grab, say, all of the impressions since the beginning of the version, just make sure that the time frame you select is previous to this date in the version date. And that way you'll get all of the impressions starting from the very beginning of the version without having to worry about, the exact time. You can just make sure that it's prior to this time and do that. And we could add additional query criteria if we wanted. We could say what treatment was, if for some reason we only wanted to see, for instance, the on treatments for this split. But in this case, we're going to get all the impressions for the split, front-end discount coupon, and version 24 of that split, all of the ones that have come in the last 7 days. And so we do create. And that adds another entry to our list of data exports down here. And as the box says, it may take up to 8 minutes. So we're going to take a quick break in the video. And when we come back, that data export will be complete. So now I'm going to refresh my browser after waiting for a little while for the data export to complete. And you can now see that the export has completed. It's got an export ID, the number of impression records contained, the size of the file, which is the gzip file, and then a download link. So I could download this file, and it will prompt me for a location, put it in my downloads directory. And if I unzip that file, which I've done behind the scenes, I can then load it into a tool like Google Sheets or Excel. It's a CSV file, so any tool that will take a CSV file will work. And you can see the fields that show up in the exported CSV. The key that was passed to get treatment, the particular split, the environment, which treatment the particular ID got for that impression, a timestamp, which is an epoch UTC timestamp in milliseconds, the label, so in other words, the targeting rule that was used, and then some information about the particular instance of the SDK, traffic type ID, and then the reception timestamp, which is the timestamp of when it was received in the split cloud, whereas the previous timestamp is the timestamp of when get treatment was called. And so that's the data you get from the exported impressions. Events are exported similarly. I won't go through a full example, but you can see the various query criteria here. The key, the traffic type, the event type ID, if you're looking at a particular value, which SDK, and machine IP. In general, you wouldn't be selecting on those. Probably the one that is most relevant is event type ID, or you may just want to see all the events for a particular traffic type like user. And it works analogously to the impressions export. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the limitations of this or the quotas that apply. One thing to realize is that each export for impressions, the maximum number of impression records we will export in a single report is 10 million. If you exceed that, it'll stop, and so you'll need to break that export up into multiple time frames to be able to get all the records. And for events, the limit of number of records is 1 million. 5 data export requests per organization per day, and we can talk about increasing that. That's a service limit that Split does. If you need a greater number of data exports per day, please contact our customer success department or send an email to help@split.io. Those exports that are listed in the window right here, there's 2 here from today, November 2nd. Those are retained for 7 days, and you can see if you do not want to retain them, you can manually delete the export by clicking on this delete link. And otherwise, they'll be removed 7 days after the export. Finally, I'll talk about who has permissions to export data. If you notice, there's this little field exporters here, which gives you the information about what users are entitled to export in this particular environment. It says anyone can export in this environment. If you want to change those settings, you can go to Admin Settings and then look at your various workspaces. And if you view them, let's say our hotels workspace, you can see that data export, anyone can export. And if you want to change that to specific users, you can click on Edit here. And then down at the bottom where it says Data Export Permissions, click on Restrict Who Can Export. And then you would add the list of users who are allowed to export from that workspace or that environment, and save that configuration. So that's data export from Data Hub in Split. As usual, if you have further questions, please consult help.split.io, which is the home of our documentation and our knowledge base. And you can always open a support ticket by emailing help@split.io.